You're looking live at the Crew-Dragon spacecraft on top of a Falcon 9 rocket set to launch 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut to the International Space Station in a little more than 3 hours. It's a beautiful sight outside, beautiful weather here at the Kennedy Space Center, where we welcome you for our live coverage of NASA and SpaceX's launch of Crew-5. I'm Daryl Nail, and with me is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken, who along with Doug Hurley were the first astronauts to fly Crew-Dragon into space. Bob, it's great to have you here. You were part of that historic flight, and now here you are back helping us with our launch commentary for today's mission.
Well, thank you, Daryl. I'm super excited to be here. A beautiful day to relive my launch experience. Looking forward to it.
You certainly will remember this experience well. We've got video recorded from just less than an hour ago of Crew-5 getting suited up in that historic suit-up room. And there you see them. Everything went smoothly. You can see the astronauts there in their spacesuits after getting them fitted and
Core
tested.
Countdown.
And those
T-minus 3 hours and 23 minutes. The displays are configured for crew ingress on schedule.
That's our launch audio. We're going to pause whenever that comes up. But tell me a little bit about those custom flight suits, Bob.
Well, Daryl, I've heard those suits referred to as space tuxedos by some of the SpaceX team, and they are custom fit, and they are, you know, what the crew needs to wear in case there was any sort of an issue inside of the capsule. They're custom fit, and they'll be ready to wear them when they head into space.
Not designed to go outside the capsule, but certainly if something were to happen inside the capsule, they pressurize, and that keeps them safe. Now, we want to invite you folks who are watching to participate in our broadcast today. If you would like to ask Bob a question over the next 3 hours, you can jump on any number of our social media handles. One of the ones that we're looking at is the hashtag AskNASA handle on Twitter. Send us that tweet with a question and the hashtag AskNASA, and we will get to it. Now, in addition to Bob's analysis, we have teams across the country covering the action, and there they are. We'll get updates from SpaceX headquarters, giving us a wave from out there in Hawthorne, California, and Houston, Texas. Mission Control Center, hello to you as well. And of course, right here in Florida, we've got our interviewees standing by. Now let's check in with our team monitoring preparations for launch at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Take it away, ladies.
Hi, I'm NASA's Sandra Jones with NASA Communications.
And I'm Jesse Anderson, a production engineering manager here at SpaceX. As we count down to liftoff, welcome to Mission Control. This is where our teams are staffed around the clock to monitor Dragon and the mission. On console or headset in Mission Control are 6 key positions. The mission director is in charge of the room and tasked with making real-time decisions to ensure mission success. The person that you'll hear talking to the astronauts is the crew operations and resources engineer, who you'll hear us refer to as the core throughout the broadcast, and there you can see him on the screen. The additional positions are focused on vehicle systems, including avionics, navigation and control, software, propulsion, life support, and communication with ground support teams.
And NASA has its own team members in Mission Control Houston, where they've been preparing the space station for Dragon's arrival. We'll meet several of the key players later when we check in with them. And upon liftoff, today's ride to the International Space Station will take about 29 hours, with Dragon flying autonomously the entire way. And just like autopilot on a commercial aircraft, the crew always has the option or the ability to take manual control of the spacecraft if needed. So let's head back over to Florida as we await the crew's departure for the launch pad. Daryl?
Sandra and Jesse, thank you very much. And here they come, Crew-5.
Crew they're ready for crew arrival, and crew are walking out of the O&C room now, on schedule.
Indeed they are. And there they are. The astronauts of Crew-5 taking their first steps outside as they head to the pad. From left to right, cosmonaut Anna Kikina, Josh Cassada, Commander Nicole Mann, and Koichi Wakata. So that was a pose for a picture. And here they go to their ride out to the pad. 3 Teslas all lined up in queue, along with a full security escort. And the folks you see there, family, loved ones. This is a moment to have an exchange, Bob.
It is. It's an opportunity for the crew, if you will, to take a little bit of a break from the technical briefs that they've been having this morning as they got suited up and understood what the weather conditions were. They get a chance to say goodbye to their families, see some smiling faces, again, have a little bit of a relaxing moment with their families before they get serious again and head out to the launch pad.
And they keep a certain distance away. You can see the stanchions, you can see the family that are gathered there. And of course, that's in the interest of the astronauts' health.
That's absolutely true, Daryl. You know, the crew has been in a quarantine state for the last several days. You know, they don't want to bring anything to space station that we don't have, you know, really tight control of. And so they'll stay back from folks, but they'll give some air hugs and some waves.
All right, let's listen in. Can't make out exactly what's being said, but we know from your experience, Bob, that it can be an emotional moment.
Absolutely. You know, for the Demo 2 mission, my son was super excited to yell Launch America. So that was the one thing that you could absolutely hear. Even inside the suit with our deep insert earplugs, you could hear that Launch America tune when he sang it out.
Your wife said the same thing, that you could hear him shouting out. And that's something actually particular to astronauts with young family members, with young children, that you have to prepare them for. I was watching a documentary. Your son wasn't exactly on board at the beginning.
Absolutely. At the beginning of the idea of a parent launching into space was something he was unfamiliar with, a little bit scared of. But we brought him down here to Kennedy, got him a chance to see a cargo launch into space. And then by the end of that experience, he was ready for me to go first, Mommy to go second, and he said he was going third. So we'll wait to see if that happens.
And then we'll have him on for the Crew-37 show.
Yeah, he thinks probably Crew-16. So
Crew-16,
he's on a little
okay,
bit faster
earlier.
Schedule, yeah.
I like him. He's ambitious. Look at that license plate. I was just noticing that. Blast off.
Yeah, Daryl, the SpaceX team has been creative with those license plates. It's always cool to see what they add to the Teslas to make the experience just a little bit personalized.
It's a nice touch. As you can see, the media in the background positioning themselves for a good shot as the Teslas roll out with a full security escort on a 20-minute drive to pad 39A. And they're queuing up a playlist right now, Bob, with some tunes. In fact, I've got the playlist to one of the vehicles. I believe it's the lead astronaut vehicle, which would be the second one in this line. Here's what they're going to be listening to. Oh Yeah by Yellow. Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins. Stronger by The Score. Slow Ride, Foghat. Everybody Got Their Something by Nikki Costa. Sabotage by the Beastie Boys. Mainstream Kid by Brandy Carlisle. and Don't Stop Believin' by Journey. It's a nice list right there.
It's a wonderful mix. There's a little bit of a slow and relaxing portion of it, as well as something with a little bit of emotion as they head out to the launch pad. You know, when Doug and I headed out to the launch pad, we had some tunes as well, and we took the experience to capture kind of the same things. The excitements of launching into space. Back in Black was one of the songs we selected from AC/DC, since we were both headed back into space again, and it was an exciting time for us.
And that was followed, I believe, by a girl from Ipanema, which was very much a contrast.
It was, Daryl. You know, this is a 20-minute ride out to the launch pad. The crew's been on a very tight schedule as they work their way to get to this point, but now's the time to sit back and wind your watch and wait for the actual launch event. So that waiting music came from the Blues Brothers movie, and Doug and I knew there was just going to be a time where we had to wait our turn to launch on that rocket.
Windows are open now in the Teslas, and family members just now retreating back from the vehicles, but then also getting another moment up there next to the car, which just completed. And there they go.
Core on countdown. T-minus 3 hours and 15 minutes. Crew are beginning their transport from the O&C room to the pad right on schedule.
There's the call out from the SpaceX team. The crew now departing the Neil Armstrong Operations and Checkout Building. Slow rolling as they make a shot available for all of the media and photographers down there. They're beginning their 20-minute drive with a full security escort across NASA's Kennedy Space Center and out to Launch Pad 39A. The track they're taking goes through the industrial area and then gets out to the NASA Causeway and the Kennedy Causeway. And Bob, as we were watching that moment there, I want to play a piece of tape that we have from your wife Megan talking about those moments leading up to launch. And we're also going to see footage of that historic mission that you participated in, Demo 2. We'll also see hers, and we'll get to see the goodbyes from either one. Let's take a look at that now. We want to give you a little flashback. Take a look at the screen now. You might remember this. Demo 2, and there you are in the light blue with your son saying goodbye to your husband, Bob Bacon, on that historic flight.
That's right. That was a really special moment, and it was great to see how excited my son was to see his father. There were no tears. It was all smiles and cheering. My son, I think, was determined to say, "Launch America," first and loudest, and so that's what he was doing. He did a great job.
And then in April, Crew 2, this was your launch. And
yes.
Now the role was reversed. You were in the astronaut suit getting ready to go out and launch, and your husband was there with your son.
That's right, and I was listening out for that Launch America, and sure enough, I could hear it from probably 20 feet away. That was a wonderful moment.
Your wife, Megan MacArthur, who flew on Crew 2 to the International Space Station following up your certification mission.
Yeah, it was a moment that we wanted our son to have a positive experience with, and he certainly did. Again, smiles and hugs and cheering. And while we didn't hear the voices of the crew's families and guests as they walked out, we did definitely hear that cheering when they got their chance to drive away.
And we continue to follow the convoy from high above, our flight operations team. The helicopter crew getting a good shot there as they go. Now let's check in with Hawthorne and get our first update from SpaceX's Kate Tice, who, by the way, was at this very desk, Bob, when you launched. Good to have you back, Kate.
Thanks, Daryl. I'm Kate Tice, and I'm the Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX, and I'm going to be bringing you live status updates from the launch teams this morning. Now, for those following along with our launch preparations over the last week, you'll know that we had a successful dress rehearsal a couple days ago of our launch operations on October 2nd, followed by a successful static fire of our 9 Merlin 1D engines. Now, fast forward a bit to this morning, and we're coming up on, there it is, the T-minus 3 hour and 12-minute mark, and so far all is going well for launch. Earlier in the night, the team began clearing the hazard area and buildings around Pad 39A, known as the Blast Danger Area, or BDA, as you might hear it called out today. At T-minus 4 hours, there was a briefing by the SpaceX launch director, and good news, there is nothing significant to report on the rocket. At this time, the advanced team was also cleared to enter the pad and start prepping the vehicle for the crew's arrival, which we're tracking there on screen, and we're expecting them to arrive at about T-minus 2 hours and 55 minutes, so just shortly coming up. So the only people remaining on the pad at this point in time are those needed for ingress of the astronauts. At the launch pad, Falcon 9 is powered on, and we're currently monitoring telemetry and pressurizing gas storage vessels. Engine and stage checkouts were performed several hours ago. On top of Falcon 9, of course, we have the Dragon spacecraft, and it is ready for the crew. Functional checkouts were performed, and most recently, the Dragon propellant system was pressurized to final flight pressure, and the side hatch has been opened by the advanced team. So at this point in time, I can report that all spacecraft systems are go. And as for the range, launch range is ready to support and working no issues at this time. And as you have probably been following along, we have been tracking the weather conditions carefully over the last week as we dealt with the remnants of Hurricane Ian. As you can see on your screen, it's a gorgeous morning out there at Kennedy Space Center. The weather is cooperating as we count down to liftoff. We have been tracking downrange winds that had been no-go overnight, but as of the T-minus 6 hour weather brief this morning, it cleared and we were green there. So everything is looking good for weather at this point, but we will continue to monitor. Now, with all that being said, let's head back over to Daryl and Bob for another check-in from Kennedy.
All right, thank you, Kate. And yes, the weather here at Kennedy is nearly perfect for launch. Let's introduce you now to today's crew. We begin with Nicole Mann. The California native holds a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering and is a colonel in the Marine Corps. Nicole was selected by NASA in June 2013, and today the Crew-5 commander will be flying into space for the first time. And once she reaches the space station, she'll be the first Native American woman to stay on station. Sitting next to Nicole is Josh Cassada. He grew up in Bear Lake, Minnesota. The physicist and U.S. Navy test pilot flew 23 combat missions. He later became an instructor at the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School, and more recently, he served as the capsule communicator in mission control. But today, he's the pilot aboard Dragon. In the role of mission specialist is veteran Japanese astronaut Koichi Wakata. Altogether, Koichi flew 4 space shuttle missions, a Roscosmos Soyuz, and was on a long-duration stay aboard the International Space Station. Altogether, Koichi has spent 11 months in space, the veteran. And the fourth member, the second mission specialist, is Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina. She graduated from the Novosibirsk State Academy of Water Transport in 2006. In 2012, Anna officially became a candidate for the position of test cosmonaut. Crew-5 will be Anna's first flight into space as part of the recent resumption of integrated crews on U.S. crew spacecraft and the Soyuz with the Russian state space corporation Roscosmos. As part of integrated crew, a week and a half ago, NASA astronaut Frank Rubio flew to the ISS aboard a Soyuz. Flying integrated crews ensures operational safety. Crew members on station are trained to do maintenance and spacewalks. It also protects against contingencies such as problems that could arise on the station, serious medical issues, or an emergency aboard the station that requires a crew and vehicle that they are assigned to return to Earth sooner than planned. All right, the crew taking a turn onto the Saturn Causeway, and this is the road that leads to the Vehicle Assembly Building, which is notable, Bob, because the astronauts right now taking a similar path to Hurricane Ian as it crossed the state and came over our area. That's the operations and support building behind it. But then behind that, going through here, is the Vehicle Assembly Building. And after studying the data, we learned the storm took that similar path. And as we widen out the view here, you can see, there it is, the Artemis logo, and a great shot of that Vehicle Assembly Building with the crew going by. Now, the Crew-5 launch was delayed several days due to Hurricane Ian taking aim at Florida. And after studying the data, here's the path that we found it took. Take a look at this graphic put together by meteorologists with satellite data It shows the track through the state. You can see the center of circulation, of course, the devastating impacts to the Fort Myers Beach area, more than 100 people killed, and complete devastation. By the time it crossed our area right there, you can see it came out the other side on Florida, between pad 39A and 39B. And 39B is where we had our moon rocket, the SLS and Orion spacecraft. But officials here at NASA and the launch team with SLS made the decision to move the SLS indoors, and this is video from that day, 3 days prior. The mighty SLS and Orion spacecraft going into the shelter of the vehicle assembly building as Hurricane Ian passed overhead. It's a 4-mile, 10-hour trek it was that day. And we got winds, Bob, over 96 knots at the top of one of the lightning towers out at pad 39B. So certainly the winds were whipping up high and down below, around 60 knots. It was a good move to put that rocket in the shelter.
Yes, it's just remarkable to kind of have seen the track of the storm, have it come right through the Kennedy Space Center, and to be sitting here just a couple of days later getting ready to launch a crew into space.
So now we await a new launch date for Artemis, which we know is going to be targeted in the mid-November area. And the astronauts just passing the vehicle assembly building. Crew-4, when they were here, the rocket was out on the pad, and they got to actually go out and get a tour. This team getting to drive by that rocket, and certainly astronauts must be thinking about that mission, right? Artemis 1, 2, and 3 going out on a test flight out to the moon, and then ultimately landing back on the moon to establish more of a permanent presence there.
Absolutely, Daryl. It's a super exciting time from an astronaut perspective. As you know, we still have missions headed to the International Space Station, taking crews up both on the Soyuz rocket and on the Falcon 9 and the Dragon at this time. We look forward to seeing the Starliner vehicle make its arrival on board the International Space Station as well. But Orion, with the Artemis missions that are upcoming, is just an exciting time. Returning to the moon is something that we all dream about.
And there they are making the right-hand turn to go towards pad 39A, where SpaceX's facilities are, as well as the launch tower and the rocket that awaits them. A brand new booster. And the good ship Endurance, as you would say, Bob. On its second flight.
On its second flight. You know, this is the time for that that slow ride song probably to kind of play back for the crew. You know, Doug and I had our waiting room music, our elevator music to kind of pass the time. The crew's, of course, excited for the mission in front of them, but they've got to wait for the actual time to launch into space.
And this is a great shot, point of view camera from the lead Tesla looking at the security vehicle in the front. You can see there the launch pad to the left as that rocket gets closer and closer. And I wonder, Bob, at what point do you start to feel some nerves kick in? Because there's this excitement, as you've described, but then also, especially for your flight, being the first one, there must have been some nerves.
You know, there's definitely some nervousness associated with launching into space. The crew gets a lot of training, and it, from an experience perspective, they try to check off as many blocks as they can so that that nervousness is something at least that they're familiar with. And so for Doug and I, you know, we had made this ride before as shuttle crew members. We climbed up to the launch pad as shuttle crew members. That wasn't new. It was really the fueling operation for us where we really felt like we were doing something new, and that nervousness started to kick in.
Interesting, because yes, that's an operation unique to SpaceX.
Yes, the fueling of the rocket with the crew on board is something that was new with the Falcon 9 rocket, and it's new from a crew, from an astronaut perspective, from our experience base, but they've managed to accomplish it super successfully.
There you see the security vehicle pauses, comes off to the side, and the Tesla vehicles roll on, along with the MRAP in tow. And this begins the part of a really neat experience, going up the slow grade as they pass the security checkpoint and into the blast danger area. This is an area only for the astronauts and the advanced team, as well as the closeout crew. It's a restricted area, and you go up that slow hill and you're looking right at that rocket.
You know, Daryl, as you make your way to the launch pad, you kind of go through layers, if you will, of people that can be near you. So whether that's your family and your guests when you're back at the ONC building, but as you make your way to the pad surface, there are these milestones that you get past where you become more and more alone on your ride into orbit. And so heading up this hill to the launch pad surface, it's definitely a smaller group, and that group continues to shrink all the way to hatch closure.
And in your case, until it was just you and Doug Hurley.
That's true. It was just Doug and I, and of course all the support team that's reaching out to you via the radio to make sure that they're watching over and making sure that you're ready to head off into space. But it was definitely Doug and I alone with our thoughts.
These 4 Crew-5 astronauts now actually on the pad surface. As you can see them driving onto it, there's a track that they just came over that goes around the launch pad. That's a relic from the space shuttle era as well as the Apollo. There's the base of the rocket, and dead ahead, the elevators to the launch tower that will take them up to the top of the crew access arm and allow them to make entryway into the Crew-Dragon. And at T-minus 2 hours and 55 minutes, we'll get that announcement that the crew has arrived, so they're a little early.
It's always best to be a little bit early if you can for each of these major events, of course. And so for them to arrive when they're supposed to be there is what's critical.
Core on countdown. T-minus 3 hours. Crew have arrived at the pad on schedule.
And so the crews arrived at the pad. Of course, they'll have a couple of opportunities to pause as they make their way up. There'll be some photo opportunities for them to take a mental picture of the rocket itself, look up from below before they climb into the capsule.
Now, Crew-5 is NASA and SpaceX's 5th crew rotation to the International Space Station since 2020. The successful NASA program is called Commercial Crew. It's based right here at the Kennedy Space Center. Time now to join Megan Cruz. She is live on top of the Operations and Support Building number 2. Was one of the leaders of this program. Megan.
Daryl, thank you so much. Yes, we are here with Phil McAllister, Director of NASA's Commercial Space Division. Phil, we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, today, we just saw the crew arrive at the pad. This is NASA's Crew-5 with SpaceX. How has working with these commercial companies benefited NASA?
So we both benefit. I think that's what's key with these partnerships. Obviously, SpaceX benefits from our 50 years of human spaceflight experience, but we also benefit by seeing these commercial companies and how they do business and how innovative they can be. And we find there's new ways of doing things that maybe we haven't thought of. So I see the partnership as benefiting both groups. It's kind of like when we first started working with the Russians. They had a very different way of doing business, and I think both programs benefited from that experience.
Right. But it's not just the Commercial Crew program. How else have we fostered commercial space and sending more people and science to low Earth orbit?
Well, I think it all started with the Commercial Cargo program in 2005. That was the first I think real commercial partnership that we had, certainly on the human spaceflight side. So then we had this cargo capability, and then we advanced that to crew, and now we can launch people to low Earth orbit and the International Space Station. And the thing that we have on our horizon, the thing that I'm working on right now, is destinations or commercial space stations. We know the space station, the International Space Station, is going to be retired in 2030. We need to have continuous access to space and a destination to go to. So now we want commercial companies to build a private space station where we can just be one of many customers.
Yeah, and to that end, what are we doing to encourage that?
We have 4 agreements and contracts with companies now: Axiom Space, NanoRacks, Blue Origin, and Northrop Grumman. They all have different concepts, and they all have different transportation modes, and they all are kind of targeting different markets. So it's really interesting. This is sort of the early development time.
Okay.
And I think things will shake out. I don't think we'll have a big enough market to keep 4 space stations on orbit. So this is the time when they innovate and they're competing, and it's kind of cool to see each one of these stations and how they develop.
And again, why is this important to us? Why do we want to be one of many customers in low Earth orbit?
So I think there's lots of reasons. Number one, when we first started building the International Space Station, there wasn't any other space stations that we could use at that time, so NASA had to build it. But today, we can leverage private sector investment because there are other customers other than NASA who want to go to low Earth orbit, and either for science or just to look out the window or whatever, for whatever reason. So we can take advantage of that. We don't have to pay for the entire infrastructure.
Right.
We can just be a customer and just pay our own sort of fare for what we do. And so it's more beneficial for NASA, and then we can take that savings and put it into our Moon Mars initiative. I really feel like the Artemis mission, the SLS and the Orion that was on the pad and we will hopefully launch next month,
Yep.
I don't think it would be as far along as it is today if it weren't for our commercial partnerships, because they help save us money, and we could take that savings and put it into our deep space exploration programs.
Yeah, and you said personally this is what you've been working on for years now. How does it make you feel knowing that, as you just said, you know, the success we've had with commercial space is really fueling what we will see in the future with NASA?
It's been very gratifying. I have to say, you know, when we were first starting out, I had to say, I think this will work. I think this is going to be a better way to do this particular mission. But I didn't have any proof. But then in 2012, we launched the first Falcon to the International Space Station for the cargo program.
Right.
That showed that the model could work. And then in 2020, we had Bob and Doug, who flew on the Demo 2 mission, went to the International Space Station. That was just, it was just an amazing mission.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. And Bob, he's co-hosting the show today, so that's full circle how we're coming here.
Yes.
Can you imagine? It's Crew-5, and just a couple of years ago, we had Bob flying for the first time with Doug.
I know, it is amazing. I was just telling some of my relatives, I was like, oh, this is the 5th one. And they're like, what? How did it happen so fast? And we go every 6 months. And so we tend to accumulate missions. And so we're putting the plaques on the wall outside my office, and it's getting pretty full, and that's pretty nice to see.
That's absolutely great. Thank you so much, Phil, for being here, and I can't wait to watch the launch with you. Thanks so much.
Right.
Back to you guys.
Thank you, Megan. T-minus 2 hours and 54 minutes and counting. And you must hear that a lot, Bob. But the people who, so many people were watching and following your mission since it was a historic first, and kind of feel an attachment to what you did that day.
Yeah, it was an exciting time, of course. I think it was a little bit strained with the COVID situation and folks kind of at home watching kind of electronically rather than in person here at the Causeway, potentially. And so a lot of folks watched the mission, and with the Bob and the Doug and the Space Dads, I think they made a connection, and they appreciated, just being a part of it.
Doug and Bob and Doug and their excellent adventure.
I don't know about all that, but we had a wonderful experience on board the International Space Station.
And it was wonderful to watch and chronicle as you guys went along, got to the space station, and came back safely. And we see some beautiful shots from high above. The weather, I mentioned at the beginning, less than 10% chance of violating. We've got onshore breezes here that are kicking up some waves. That's some rough surf conditions. That, of course, no impact to the launch today, but you can see the flags flying and the clock ticking down. If you're just joining us, you're watching live coverage of SpaceX mission known as Crew-5 as we watch the first 2 astronauts walk out onto the pad surface, getting ready to do what, and I have to admit, I have to attribute this, the rocket recline. There it is.
I like the way they did it kind of in coordination as well. I think that was something that Doug and I didn't quite nail on the Demo 2 mission, but I appreciate them getting it sorted out by Crew-5.
That was Commander Nicole Mann and pilot Josh Cassada that just took that look up, and I mentioned the attribution. That was our voice of mission control. Rob Navius came up with that phrase, so got to give him credit for that, the rocket recline. We'll get the next 2 mission specialists who will do the same move, but for now, they'll go into the elevator, the same elevator, Bob, that you rode on 2 missions aboard the space shuttle and Crew-Dragon.
That's true, Daryl. That elevator there on the 39 Alpha launch pad is just a wonderful experience to kind of be able to bring it back into the game and be able to fly kind of, if you will, slowly up to the pad surface before making a stairway walk up to the actual location where you walk out to the Dragon capsule.
And there we see the top of the elevators where they'll walk out, and this is something that they have rehearsed a few times. Certainly we were here when they rehearsed it the other day during what's called a dry dress rehearsal.
Yeah, the crew has been through this before, and like I mentioned a little bit earlier, it is really important to kind of get the nervousness out, to have done these operations once before. We can see Nicole and Josh there as they've made their way out of the elevator. They'll walk around the back and make their way up the stairs to the actual walkout area where they'll potentially have a chance to make a phone call, reach out to their family one more time before heading out to the White Room itself and climbing into the ship.
And the closeout team right behind them from SpaceX as they greet some of the members of that team with some fist bumps. The telephone you mentioned, Bob, is there on the right-hand side of that hallway there. But what I notice is the astronauts tend to pause right about here because it looks like that is a spectacular view.
It is, Daryl. It is their chance. Of course, you know, you've mentioned the rocket recline where they're able to look up at the rocket. They're kind of co-level with the vehicle at this point. They're able to look out, see the ocean, see the rocket, see the capsule itself before getting ready to kind of take that next step and head into the vehicle.
And there you see one of the astronauts doing just that. To the right, they are looking out over Launch Complex 39A and the Space Coast. No doubt having a view that is similar to this from our flight ops team here at Kennedy. What a great shot. On the left there, you've got the launch tower, and that is the crew access arm that bridges the gap between the launch tower and the rocket on the right.
And you can see, Daryl, the second two crew members getting ready to do their rocket recline, if you will, and get a chance to look up at the vehicle. I know they're excited to get their chance to climb in and strap down. Not quite as perfect and in sync as Josh and Nicole were, but they did a great job. Again, better than Bob and Doug. So
better than Bob and Doug, but not quite as tightly choreographed as Nicole and Josh. They nailed it. Nonetheless, they get a great view right before they make their way into their spacecraft, and that will ultimately take them into space. We've got a split screen now. The two mission specialists on the left, and to the right, we're tracking our pilot and commander. Now they stagger the astronauts in this fashion because everything is highly proceduralized, right? As they go through the lines, check off the mission milestones, and then also it's carefully choreographed because you want to have everybody being orderly as they get into the spacecraft.
Absolutely, Daryl. There is a well choreographed checklist that the SpaceX team has on their tablets as they follow along with the crew accomplishing the steps in front of them. But remember, there's just a single hatchway, and they need to go in sequence, and it wouldn't be helpful for all four of them to be there at the same time. So we do bring them in sequence, Nicole boarding first, followed by the rest of the crew.
Looking at the launch tower there, pad 39A. Bob, this is the same launch tower that launched the space shuttle. It's been, of course, renovated by SpaceX. They've made a lot of improvements in order to accommodate the Falcon 9, but it also has some throwback to the shuttle era. And there's part of the fixed service structure that's still a part of that structure today.
That's true, Daryl. The 39 Alpha launch complex was modified to be able to handle the Falcon 9 rocket, and Doug and I were super excited to launch again from the exact same location. There are remnants of the shuttle program that are still kind of out there. There's a series of chevrons. You can kind of see them in the image there. The kind of the yellow pathway, if you will. The crews go in the opposite direction there. Those chevrons point towards the slide wire baskets that they would use if they needed to do an emergency egress off the pad surface. Those slide wire baskets are a legacy item from the shuttle program.
And here we go, the first two astronauts to board Crew-Dragon. On the left, Josh Cassada, and on the right, Commander Nicole Mann. All smiles as they make their way down the crew access arm.
You can see the fist pumps. They're definitely getting excited now as they get ready to board the ship.
And they make their way into what's called the White Room. Do a photo op there.
Core on countdown.
And you can see
2
the
hours
space.
and 47 minutes. Crew have arrived at the White Room just a little bit ahead of schedule.
There's the announcement. And you can see one of the SpaceX techs handed Nicole Mann and Josh a Sharpie, which this is something that's actually on their to-do list for launch operations. And what they're going to do now is sign their signature onto the NASA meatball, or right there around it. That NASA meatball is encircled with signatures from all the previous NASA crews that have gone up to the International Space Station. That signature would include yours, Bob, as well as your wife, Megan MacArthur.
Yes, Joe, that's a nice tradition that the SpaceX team added and allowed kind of Doug and I to get started. And it's pretty neat to get your name added to the wall there, the White Room wall that leads to the Dragon capsules that head to space station.
And there you see her putting her signature, making the way around the NASA meatball, handing off the pen to Josh. And to the right, you see the SpaceX logo for their commercial missions. They're also starting a set of signatures, which is a great sign about starting to establish that economy in low Earth orbit, the commercialization of low Earth orbit.
It's exciting to see the economy in low Earth orbit continue to grow, Daryl. It's also exciting to see the cadre of astronauts continue to grow and view that group as our partners of folks who've been to low Earth orbit, who've been into the black of space, and it's just exciting to see that group continue to grow.
As the astronauts prepare to go inside, the first two, the commander and pilot, we've got the mission specialists on the left-hand side of your screen, making their way towards the crew access arm. The White Room was a term first used during the Gemini era, literally describing the color of the room, which is painted white. You can see an inflatable seal, which is black colored, connected to the spacecraft, and it inflates to create that environmental seal around the side of the spacecraft, connecting it with the White Room.
It does, Gerald. That seal, of course, would protect if there was a kind of rain or anything else kind of going on in the area. We don't have that today. We have beautiful weather, but it does ensure that the elements of Florida don't make too far of a way into the capsule itself. So you don't want any mosquitoes or anything headed into orbit with you. And so that seal does its job.
It does indeed. There's a lot of humidity and mosquitoes out here in Florida. Fortunately, today, we've got a nice little breeze that's keeping it off us here at the desk, which is nice, and kept it off the astronauts and crew when they were getting in their vehicles, running about a 10-knot onshore breeze, which should help push the clouds around. We've got a few of them out overhead. Our launch weather officer for today, Brian Sizik, from the 45th Space Wing, telling us that we've got a nice high-pressure system in the area, Bob, that's keeping everything clear as the first astronaut climbs aboard.
Core on countdown at T-minus 2 hours and 44 minutes. Crew have begun ingressing Dragon.
You got to be careful to not bump your head, it looks like.
You absolutely, Daryl, need to be careful as you climb through that hatchway. There's a pressure seal that needs to be kind of maintained in pristine condition, so when the time comes to close the hatch, you'll actually get a good seal with that hatch closure operation. And so the crew is keenly aware that they need to protect that environment, and that they climb into the vehicle very carefully.
Carefully stepping over that seal. That's important, and later we'll see the closeout team closely inspecting that seal just to make sure that there's no debris, no what they call FOD, foreign object debris, which could compromise the seal, something you want to make sure you keep the environment on the inside and space on the outside.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That team, of course, it's a little bit difficult in the suit itself to be able to monitor and make sure that you don't bump anything that you're not supposed to bump into. But that team of SpaceX folks just does a great job with assisting the crew, letting them do as much as they would like to do on their own, but also ensuring that everything's done perfectly so that nothing has to be redone in the time-critical situation for launch.
And here come our second two astronauts, mission specialists Koichi Wakata and Anna Kikina. They're next up in the white room. Big thumbs up from Koichi. He's the veteran of this group, Bob. We got 3 first-time flyers and a guy that has a lot of experience in space.
That's true, Daryl. You know, Koichi was in the astronaut office when I arrived a couple decades ago, you know, just having joined and trained as a shuttle astronaut, getting the opportunity to fly on his 3rd space vehicle kind of going forward here. It's got to be exciting for him to try on a new spaceship.
And making his 5th flight into space. Got the green light flashing above, and I'm going to take that as green as go.
Certainly better than a red flashing light.
Yes.
So it does take a relatively large team. It does seem like you know, the crew being able to head out to the launch pad and climb in almost by themselves would be a thing. But in order to make sure that things are all done perfectly, that team of SpaceX folks follows along very carefully with the procedure to make sure everything's done exactly per the checklist.
And our mission specialists will now put their signatures on the white room as the commander and pilot finish up securing their 5-point harness into their seat, getting a snug fit, as you can see there. Josh Cassada making sure everything is lined up correctly. Looks like he's got 4 hands. Those are his gloves. I'm sure an extra set of hands couldn't hurt.
Yeah, no, he just has the 2 hands, just like the rest of us, but he does have the gloves there kind of taken off to kind of give him some additional dexterity as he tries to work through getting all the strap-in process completed. You mentioned the 5-point harness, much like a racing harness that the astronauts strap in with. Likely they won't need all of the capability of that harness as they head into orbit and take their ride, but it does provide some capability should the emergency escape system be activated to really keep them strapped tightly into their seats.
Seats that are also sized to your proportions, right? And the suit is custom, but the seat, I believe, has 3 different sizes. I believe small, medium, and large.
The seat has some different sizes. The armrest have some different lengths, and the footrest have some different lengths. So there are several adjustments that can be made. Not quite completely custom, but it does, I guess, with you look at all the way up to Crew-5, we probably haven't exercised all the options that are out there, but definitely have some flexibility in customizing the seat to make it fit the astronaut.
And interesting note about the spacecraft endurance that SpaceX and NASA recently hitting a really incredible joint milestone. Crew-5 is SpaceX, of course, is 8th crewed mission since May of 2020. But as of this mission, Bob, Dragon is now certified for 5 times reuse. Prior to that, it was 1-time reuse, but they've gone through the process with NASA and accomplished that reuse milestone, which that's impressive. We'll see more flights from Endurance.
That's true, Daryl. It is really critical that these commercial vehicles kind of meet their reuse milestones, you know, so that we can continue servicing the International Space Station by rotating crews. And so it's a huge accomplishment to get that behind folks so that we can continue planning for, you know, the duration of Space Station's lifetime being accessible by the Dragon capsule.
We continue to watch the action live. In the meantime, let's toss it out back to California with Jesse and Sandra.
Thanks, Daryl. This is always an exciting moment watching the crew climb aboard Dragon. This phase of the mission is also referred to as crew ingress, and that term ingress is used when crew members are getting into a spacecraft or airlock, while egress means the exact opposite, they're exiting. So prior to getting on board, the crew completed a foreign object debris check or FOD check, and that means they themselves have to be inspected for any substances or debris that isn't supposed to be on them or their spacesuits, because this could potentially cause damage to Dragon. And that's also why the crew is wearing covers on their boots and on the umbilical port of their spacesuits. Those covers get removed before they enter the spacecraft.
Foreign object debris prevention actually begins right here in Hawthorne before the spacecraft leaves SpaceX headquarters and is carefully controlled all the way through launch day until Dragon's hatch is closed. They're now getting buckled in and attaching their umbilicals to their suits, and you can see the suit techs or closeout techs are present, helping them out as needed. The umbilicals allow the crew to have comms through their suit, air to help keep them cool, as well as delivers nitrox for suit pressurization. As we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, the suit's primary function is to protect the crew in the event of a cabin depressurization.
And there are 4 seats configured right now inside of Dragon and are numbered 1 to 4 from right to left when looking at the seats from the hatch. Anna Kikina will be in seat 1 on the very far left, and you see she just climbed in a couple of moments ago. Nicole Mann will be, Josh Cassada will be in seat 2, or the commander's seat, and Josh Cassada will be beside her in the pilot seat. And then on the very end is Koichi Wakata, who is in seat 4, all the way to the right, who just climbed aboard just a moment ago as well. And directly in front of the crew members are 3 displays, which they'll use throughout the flight, getting insight into Dragon's systems, seeing any alerts or issues with the vehicle, and if required, taking control and manually flying Dragon.
Now, once the crew is all settled in, coming up will be a comm check, and that will be to make sure that they can communicate with mission control. And then, once that's complete, their seats will be rotated in position for launch. So very exciting watching them getting settled in. We've got this awesome view of the Falcon 9 with Dragon on top, crew on board already. We have been watching the crew since this morning make their way to the launch pad, climb up the fixed service structure, walk across that beautiful crew arm that you see there on your screen, and now they are getting settled into each one of their seats, and there is the Crew-5 crew there on your right-hand screen.
And the crew will remain in these spacesuits through the ascent portion of today's flight. They'll be able to get out of their suits and get a little more comfortable shortly after liftoff, but for the portion that is the most dynamic portion of the flight, they will remain in those spacesuits. And the primary function of those spacesuits is to protect the crew in an event of a cabin depressurization. And if that would occur, the suit could inflate to provide a habitable environment long enough for the crew to return home. But with the crew now inside of the Dragon vehicle, let's go ahead and check in with Kate Tice for the latest. How's it going, Kate?
I've been following along with the launch teams, and they continue to work through the countdown. Currently, no issues are in work, and we are awaiting the comm checks with the crew inside Dragon, which you seated there. The first check that we will hear is to check the umbilical, which is the harness that is attached from each spacesuit to the vehicle itself. You can actually see the umbilical port there on the right thigh. It's that little black box. That's the umbilical port that connects the spacesuit to their seat. The second check that we'll hear will check the ground stations, which, as the name suggests, are the ground-based support staff here on Earth. And then the third comm check that we'll hear will be for TDRS, or the tracking and data relay satellites. And those are that's a constellation of 10 geosynchronous satellites that help us maintain contact around the globe. As of right now, the Dragon launch op team tracking no issues. I was listening in throughout the webcast on their nets, and it sounds like that we are running perfectly on time and just a little bit early. We have plenty of margin. So if for whatever reason something arises and we need a little bit extra time to work through an issue, we've got it in the countdown. For those that are new to our launch webcasts, of course, our countdown is the framework that helps to sync all of our teams up. So we build margin into each step that we walk through or proceed through on the countdown to make sure that we have plenty of time to work any issues that might arise. So with all that being said, everything is looking good on the Dragon side. As for the Falcon 9 team, they are located in Firing Room 4 in the Launch Control Center at Kennedy Space Center, which you see there on your screen. Those folks are settling in for final checkouts, propellant loading, and launch. The Falcon 9 team will undergo their own comm checks with the crew at about the T-minus 2 hour mark. As for the range, they continue to report no issues, and the weather forecast continues to be acceptable. We had a less than 10% chance of violation of our weather conditions, and as you can see on your screen, it's a beautiful morning there at Kennedy Space Center. Now, of course, we are looking at weather not only at the launch site, but around the world. We need to make sure that conditions are acceptable if Dragon has to splash down in the Atlantic in case of an escape. We're also monitoring contingency splashdown locations if the crew had to come back to Earth before docking with the space station. Now, if that were to happen, SpaceX and NASA would coordinate with the U.S. Coast Guard to ensure safety upon splashdown, including extra ships and air assets to patrol the 10 nautical mile keep-out zone. That's, of course, to help mitigate safety concerns for any boaters approaching the landing area. And, of course, we've also been monitoring downrange weather, which, as I reported earlier, was no-go yesterday, but at the T-minus 6-hour weather brief turned to green. So we're proceeding, but keeping an eye on those downrange wind conditions. So as the clock continues to tick, we're approaching the T-minus 2-hour and 31-minute mark. All systems to continue to be go for launch. Let's head back over to Jesse, who's actually here in Hawthorne with me, just across the floor.
Thanks, Kate. Not only is today an exciting day because it's launch day, but it's also a pretty exciting year, as this year marks Dragon's 10th year in operational flight. It took a lot of love and dedication to get here today, and we are still learning and innovating from each launch. From the beginning, Dragon was designed to eventually fly people. The Dragon hanging from the ceiling next to us was initially flown to certify SpaceX for cargo missions to the space station over 10 years ago, which flew in 2010. Yet a window was added to hint at our plans for flying crew in the near future. Now, of course, the Dragon behind us and the Dragon supporting today's mission taking Crew-5 to the space station are very different, a testament to how far we've come. It's been a little over 2 years since we flew Demo 2, which was on May 30th of 2020. And since then, SpaceX has been regularly flying crew missions for NASA to and from the International Space Station at an average cadence of one flight every 6 months since Crew-1. Crew-5 marks SpaceX's 6th crewed spaceflight for NASA and our 8th human spaceflight mission overall, including private passenger missions Inspiration-4 and Axiom-1. Now, speaking of Inspiration-4, you may remember Jared Isaacman, who served as commander for the Inspiration-4 mission. Jared is planning to return to space with us under the Polaris program. Now, through this program, Jared, along with his crew, will embark on 3 human spaceflight missions, culminating in the inaugural flight of SpaceX's Starship with humans on board. The crew for the first mission, Polaris Dawn, has been busy preparing for their flight, which is currently targeted for no earlier than March 2023. In addition to Jared Isaacman, the Polaris Dawn crew consists of Scott Kidd Poteet, the mission's pilot, SpaceX's Sarah Gillis as mission specialist, and SpaceX's Anna Menon, the second mission specialist and medical officer, and there you can see them on the screen. The Polaris Dawn mission will endeavor to fly higher than any other Dragon mission to date. The crew will also be attempting the world's first ever commercial spacewalk using our newly designed EVA suits. And our progress with human space exploration does not stop there. As you can see, we've started construction on a new Starship pad at Kennedy Space Center, the same pad that will take NASA's human space lander system to the moon.
That's right, Jesse. NASA's efforts, particularly with the Commercial Crew Program and the certification of the SpaceX Dragon, are aiding in building the foundation for a robust U.S.-led commercial economy in low Earth orbit. Commercial transportation to space is but one element of NASA's larger plan for commercialization, and we're enabling the development of commercial space stations, private astronaut missions to station, demand for in-space manufacturing, and much more. And soon, the agency will launch Artemis to the moon and beyond as part of a test flight of the Space Launch System rocket.
Dragon, ready for comm checks.
Copy, Dragon. Stand by for umbilical comm check.
And we did just hear those words that comm checks will be starting here shortly. So the Orion spacecraft and all of its components will be tested from end to end in this uncrewed test flight. This is a key milestone before we fly humans on board as part of Artemis 2, and then have humans land on the moon on Artemis 3. Now on your screen, you're seeing some waves, some thumbs up, some goodbyes to the team on the ground. Once they close this hatch...
PLT, MS-1, MS-2, comm check.
CDR has you loud and clear.
PLT has you loud and clear.
MS-1 has you loud and clear.
MS-2 has you loud and clear.
Core, loud and clear. Umbilical comm check is complete. Stand by for ground station comm check.
And those comm checks have begun. We're going to hear a series of those communication checks to make sure that the crew can hear the folks on the ground and vice versa.
And looks like the crew is very excited, waving at the camera to the world. Maybe some poses for some photos there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I was saying right before the comm checks started, once they close this hatch, that's the last human being they're going to see on Earth until they splash down in a few months from now. You can also see the crew with their iPads on their tablets on their legs there. They have a variety of different procedures and reference materials that they can view during the mission as well. You'll see them getting that configured and ready for launch now, 2 hours and 25 minutes from now.
And these procedures are very, very specific. They are following them all the way, step by step, all the way through. This does include, if you're just now joining us, we are awaiting some comm checks, which they have begun. And they will be stepping through several different comm checks to make sure that the crew can hear and communicate with the ground teams here in Mission Control.
And we will do those comm checks through multiple paths to Dragon, including TDRS and ground stations, which you'll hear coming up throughout the continuation of these comm checks. The ground, of course, refers to the different ground stations, and SpaceX has ground stations all around the globe. And then you'll also hear from Core, MD, and LD. The Core in Hawthorne is the Crew Operations and Resource Engineer. The LD is the launch director down in Florida and oversees the countdown ops. And then MD is the mission director here in Hawthorne, who is the overall flight lead for SpaceX.
I just love the excitement of this crew. And this is a pretty cool view inside of Dragon. You can see the 4 seats for the 4 crew members, but Dragon's actually designed to have up to 7 crew members. So right below this row of seats, there can fit 3 additional seats. Today, since we only have 4 crew members, below the crew that you see on your screen is actually cargo stowed inside of Dragon.
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
SpaceX Dragon, loud and clear.
Core, loud and clear. Ground station comm check is complete. Stand by for TDRS comm check.
We did have a good comm check with the Core standing by for the next comm check, which is going to be TDRS, and that's
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
SpaceX Dragon, loud and clear.
Core, loud and clear. TDRS comm check is complete. Stand by for comm checks with DC, MD, and LD in the launch configuration.
Dragon, DC on countdown 1. Com check.
DC, Dragon, loud and clear.
DC, loud and clear. Stand by for com checks with MD.
Dragon, MD on countdown 1. Com check.
MD, Dragon, loud and clear.
MD, loud and clear. Stand by for com check over Dragon to ground. Dragon, MD, Dragon to ground. Com check.
MD, Dragon, loud and clear.
MD, loud and clear. Stand by for com checks with LD.
Dragon, LD on countdown 1. Com check.
LD, Dragon, loud and clear.
LD, loud and clear. Stand by for com check over Dragon to ground. Dragon, LD on Dragon to ground. Com check.
LD, Dragon, loud and clear.
And LD, loud and clear. Let's go have some fun.
Dragon, SpaceX. Launch configuration com checks are complete. Report when ready for seat rotation per section 2 of 4.100.